what this is around actually is, for the first time as a trust, we actually represented the club at the EFL's annual general meeting out in Portugal. You may have seen this occasion in the papers, junket ride to Portugal, owners of the EFL, etc. We took part in this previously over the last few years. How long is it now? 5 years, I think it'd be. Eric and David have gone. Eric to act on behalf of the owners, and David, Charles, because there's a lot of admin and regulation changes as part of the point of the conference. They rebranded it a bit this year to call it Owners and Chief Execs Conference, and we decided that we really should be trying to make our mark as a trust and trying to be more influential on the EFL to try and get the view across that actually fans are important. They're not just customers, they're part of the whole fabric of football, and actually they can be owners, it can be responsible owners. So that was part of the aim of going out there. So as we went through, I'd say there were a couple of reps from each club go out, so that's all 72 clubs. Actually, now 70 clubs were represented. I think Oldham and possibly Bradford City didn't turn up. Everyone else turned up. Quite helpfully, Winckelmann was supposed to turn up but didn't, so I didn't have to avoid him quite as thoroughly the whole 2 days I thought I was going to, but that was okay. Essentially, it was an interesting time. It was held over 2 days. The first day was really started off with a sort of conference introduction by Sean Harvey, telling us all how wonderful he is and all the work the EFL is doing. There are a few key points out of that I think might be of interest to you. One in particular, they held last year a survey of all clubs, asking them about what they thought were good about the EFL, bad about the EFL, and their concerns for the future. We actually, as the DTB, worked with the Football Club Board to put in our response to that survey. But the first thing that really shocked me was less than 50% of clubs bothered replying. At least those who did respond were probably quite sensitive, because really the only positive that came out that was highlighted was the community activities the EFL do, and a little more on that later. That was quite impressive. But they came down to the negatives that people thought about it. It's the financial distribution, the reliance on Premier League money, the lack of diversity and the disunity within the EFL itself. And there was a lot of future concerns expressed around ownership and the issues with a lot of the owners in the league and the widening gaps between the haves and the have-nots. So the actual information that came out of it I think was quite sensible, but whether the EFL take that on board or not is probably the next battle we have to fight. Moving on for that, as I say, the EFL Trust, which is their charity, a bit like our foundation, it acts as an overarching sort of body. That actually had a turnover of 18.5 million last year, and when you add up all of the 72 clubs' charitable arms, so including our foundation, it's a total turnover of 55 million going through to good causes through the EFL, which I think actually should be applauded. It's one of the things that there's an awful lot goes on through football to help things improve. And one of the things coming out is that for all the bad that happens around the place, they really don't advertise the good they do as much as they could. And I think even we're bad at doing that sometimes, so we ought to look to that. A couple other little points around there. They talked about the new broadcasting deal. As you may have seen in the paper since then, they're not taking up the Sky option and going out to tender for the next broadcasting deal next year. And they've already sold international TV rights from next year onwards for 5 years, guaranteed 126 million. So it gives you an idea of what the EFL pulls in compared to the Premier League, who I think get best part of $1 billion a year. So we get about 5% of their TV revenue. And then in the League One, as I say, we get 12% of that 5%. We then had an EFL Division 1 sub-meeting, so that's just the 24 clubs in League One.
23 clubs.
23 clubs, and Winckelmann's son did turn up, but although interestingly, Catriona of Charlton didn't, which was a bit of a running gag for us, because she never seems to turn up anywhere where I am. So that was one owner I didn't have to meet, who I was trying to avoid as well. Not a lot came out of that, but probably the most important thing was, as far as everyone was concerned from the EFL side as well as the clubs, the whole game solution idea is as dead as a dodo from their point of view, which I think everyone was very happy about. One thing that's the EFL quite keen on, but seems to me probably a waste of money given how they're going, is they're actually looking at trying to take full-time referees down as low as Division 1 now. Which, since they got full-time referees in the Championship and they don't seem to be any better than the part-time ones they had before, is probably a bit of a waste of money. They then, the last piece of the first day, there was a sort of wrap-up, and there was a long speech by Andy Ambler. Some of you may remember he was the Chief Executive at Millwall. He's now Head of Professional Game Relations for the FA, which is an interesting title, but part of that role is to work with supporters groups. He offered to talk with supporters groups, and one of the things I was interested to know if anyone here would be interested is we could probably get him down to talk and do a Q&A session at Don's Trust general meeting, and if that's the sort of thing you'd actually be interested in hearing. So I mean, I'm happy to invite him, but if it's not the sort of thing you want to hear, then obviously not a lot of point. So show of hands if that might be of interest to people. Sort of general, sort of a bit more than 50%. I'll see if we can get him to come along. A lot of you talked about some of the changes that are going through the International Football Board, which basically changes the laws of the games. I think you've heard of most of these going through, like the change in the penalty kicks from AB to ABBA and other such delights. I won't go through them in detail, but the one that really came out on there is the Premier League are absolutely hung up on video referees and are going to be doing it as soon as they possibly can. The EFL aren't committed to that yet, but it seemed to be something that's going to happen. They're already heavily trialling all of the video assistant referee technology at St George's Park and trying to train up people to use it before it's actually come in. So the Premier League is certainly very much in with that. Probably the last thing of note for that was, so they confirmed the format of the Checker Trade Trophy to include the under-21 teams, which obviously we voted against. One of the things they've said is they really want everyone to support it this year, and if you advertise or quote publicise against it, they will withhold the extra money they were going to give us for topping up because of low attendances. Fortunately, talk of Eric, the amount of money they talk about is so small, we're just going to tell them to shove it anyway. Oh, and yes, one interesting one that came up, there's a new regulation they brought in, which I jokingly talked to their league person as they're trying to make it the franchise clause, which apparently is now against the rules of the EFL to unfairly criticise another club or club official. We confirm with them that it can only be used if the complaint is made by the affected party, and then only if manifestly unfair or untrue. And the legal representative did agree that our stance re-franchise wouldn't be an issue. So I did abstain on that one, but it has gone through, but I don't think it's really going to affect us too much.
Who do you think that's aimed at? Seriously, there's usually a reason for that.
I was trying to remember there was a couple of spats between clubs last year they felt were unseemly. I think it was around the fielding of weakened teams towards the end of the season.
Okay.
Birmingham.
Was it Blackburn?
Birmingham.
Birmingham stayed up probably because they played a week. Huddersfield being a weak team. I think that was one of the things that they particularly picked up. Day two, there's a lot of stuff going through. Really, the two key things I think for us, there was a lot of talk about the rail seating and the confirmation that the SGSA, the Sports Ground Safety Authority, have agreed that clubs that are not subject to all-seater criteria are allowed to use rail seating. So as Eric said, that doesn't get us over the line for being able to have a test without paying the ground back, but it gets us a lot closer. So we're pushing, and as far as they can tell, with everything they tell there, they're pushing against a relatively open door. I I think everyone's agreed that there is absolutely no logical safety reason why rail seating is any more or less safe than normal seating. And the last one, which personally I was very disappointed in, they've ran a trial last year in the Championship around a version of the Rooney rule, which I don't know how many of you know. It's an American football rule that came in, where every time there's a position made vacant as sort of manager or coach in their case, you have to interview at least one minority ethnic candidate. And they found that when they forced that through, the take-up rate of minority candidates was actually went up a lot in America, purely because before they brought the rule in, there were so many who weren't ever interviewed but were manifestly qualified and suitable to do the job. They ran the trial in Championship. They said effectively there were 9 instances where it should have applied. 3 of the teams blatantly ignored the rules anyway. Of the 6 who actually followed the rules, 5 of them said, well, he didn't make things any worse, and actually 3 of them appointed minority coaches off the back of it. So the people who actually took part said it was a very positive thing and they felt they supported it. The good news is they've agreed to carry on that pilot and look to implement it across the league. So I think that's a very positive. The thing that really appalled me was when they were looking to say, but we'd like to strengthen sanctions against people who ignore it. That was completely rejected by an even bigger majority in the opposite way. So I think there's a lot of education that still needs to go through the EFL ownership structure on that one, but at least something started.
Can I make a quick point on that? Is there not a law in this country already stating that we have to already make sure that ethnic minority people or religious grounds or anything like that they have to be given the opportunity to apply for a job, and should their qualifications thing, then it's only the person themselves that stops them from getting a job and not anything else?
Yeah. Legally, yes, but in terms of the actual application thereof, if you don't enforce a policy that says you have to interview at least someone with from an ethnic minority background, it's very easy to come up with your interview shortlist of, say, 6 white people. And that tends to be what's been happening in the past. I mean, even with this rule in place last year, we've gone from 3 black coaches in the EFL, managers in the EFL, down to 1 now. There's only 1 left, I think, which is Keith Curl. He's still there. So, the actual rate of pickup is horrendous. So whilst I think clubs do follow the law, this is an over and above the law method of trying to encourage people to get them through the door, because that seems to be the biggest problem. And all the clubs interviewed that way said they were highly impressed with the people they got through the door, and they were glad they did it because they found candidates, even if they were unsuccessful, who they wouldn't necessarily have got before. So that's the aim behind it. So good news, something's happening. Bad news, not nearly as much or as fast as it should be, but again, it's something we'll try and push as we go on through that. So that's probably enough, because I don't want to bore you too much with that, but it was a good event from our point of view. It was very eye-opening for me in particular, and we did make use of our contacts with Exeter, Wickham to Shanghai and make sure that a lot of people know our views as trust-owned clubs and try and get that fan angle a little bit more in there. So hopefully we'll be able to push that more with time as we go through. Okay. Ray, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that was interesting, Matt. Referees, it's always a contentious issue, but I hear what you said about, this possibility of bringing in professional referees to Division 1, and, I share the concern, will it make any difference? I mean, as a fan who pays to see a match, what I would like to do is to see referees factor in the enjoyment of the game for fans who pay to see the match. We don't pay to see the referee, we actually play to see fast-flowing football. And sometimes referees get carried away with the whistle, they send people off at the wrong times. And I think if they would, their focus was more on the enjoyment of the game, which we pay to see, and were to get more flow to the game, I think that would be a real step forward. Thank you.
Yeah, can't really disagree with that. Getting it done is a tricky one, but that's one of the sorts of things where I thought if we could get, say, Andy Ambler here, that actually is part of his sphere of influence. He's supposed to be taking some of those sorts of thoughts back, and he's in a position on the FA Council where he can actually try and make things happen. So that's the sort of thing I like for us to try and get through to him and push, but as I say, can't necessarily guarantee we'll be able to make much progress on that first. Okay, John.
I've got a few pals in the One Ball Down Under Supporters Association, and they've been having terrible problems with the iFollow system. Was this too early for them to even talk about their iFollow? Because overseas it seems to be causing a huge amount of problems for people.
Well, it did talk a lot about iFollow. Basically, almost everything they said was how positive it was at having this excellent new platform and all the capabilities it would give. And I think, to be fair, once it's actually debugged properly, the concept behind it, what they're offering, is probably good. What, as seems to have always been the case with any major IT project anywhere on the planet, as far as I can see, the rollout has been done too early and not very well. So at the moment, yeah, it's an IT project that's gone slightly off the rails and needs to get back on it. I know they will be concentrating on it a lot. One of the things we've asked fans who've got problems with that, because we don't have any control over iFollow at all, is to send the information through the club so we can try and push on the Football League to make sure they try and fix the things that are impacting our fans as early as we can. So again, if you pass that on to your colleagues to try and do that. Is there anything you want to add on that, Eric?
I asked Chris Slavin, most of you know Chris, who is the club's comms executive, journalist, to canvass people for feedback on iFollow. So don't go onto Facebook and complain. Write the Football League, the English Football League, and write to us too. So if you get the same issue arising several times, it's much more powerful if we're representing that than individuals do it. Chris has collected a lot of feedback. It's not as bad as it sounds when you listen to the one individual. It's not as widespread as you'd think. In fact, the feedback is generally very positive when it works, which is most of the time. The main feedback is, yes, there are places where it doesn't work sometimes. Secondly, it seems that on some of the recent broadcasts on the radio bit, we've been cut off. I think the last home game we started 10 minutes late due to a fault in the centre. And people wanting desperately to synchronise the commentary with the picture, which some people have found a way to do that. So I've asked Chris just to investigate exactly how it works, and we'll put out a good practice guide as well as a summary of the questions we've asked the Football League, the answers we've got, what we think is going to happen to get it better. And yeah, it's not right there, but it's when it does work, it's a significant improvement, and it will work a lot better as time goes on, as Matt said.
Thanks, Eric. Right, Ian?
No, I was just interested to find out whether or not there's been any discussion at these end-of-year shindigs in sunny Portugal, whether there's been any chatter about the rebranding of the Football League to the English Football League. Bearing in mind, some of these people clearly don't understand the fact that it's called the Football League because it is the Football League, with the emphasis on the rather than Football League. Seems they've dumbed it down to me, but it's their baby, so.
Unfortunately, another one of those areas where we get no real say in it, and we're in quite a small minority, I think, of people who thought it was a bad idea because it's sold to them on the basis it improves your brand recognition in Asia, to coin a phrase. And if you say that, they'll agree to virtually anything because they think it gets more money. So personally, I think the Football League had that cachet because, I mean, it's the one because it was the first one. So why lose that by sticking an E in front of it? But that wasn't real. I think that really was probably the debate of the year before, wasn't it? Yeah, I know. I remember getting a fairly disgusted email from Eric about it when it came through. But Unfortunately, as a group of 72 clubs, generally one club, one vote, although the championship votes do count more in quite a lot of the cases. And you've got to appreciate there are 3 fan zone clubs. There's probably another 10 or 20 are owned by very sensible people, and the rest of them are there to make as much money as possible. So that view generally wins. But not always, and we will get there with some things. Okay, John?
Was anything said about artificial pitches?
Not specifically this time. There's a quick note. Is apparently the the Premier League are likely to mandate that you have to have a plastic pitch around your pitch. I.e., all of the areas outside of the pitch where the lines will run, etc., will be artificial, but the pitch itself will be grass. They didn't go any further on there. I think basically what they said is it's still something that's being looked at, and they may look to go to another vote again next year or the year after, but it's sort of bubbling under. I think what they're trying to do is see if they get better, get more feedback from how it's working in the National League before they go any further.
I could add something to that.
Oh, that'd be good, thanks.
When it came up for a vote a couple of years ago, I think, it was really quite fractious because the story I heard, so this is what I've been told as opposed to it is fact, was that the conference, now the National League, have been leaned on really heavily to allow artificial pitches on the understanding that League 2 and League 1 were going to vote for them. So the conference implemented them, and then League 2 voted, and I think it was tied. Therefore it didn't go through, and the conference are left high and dry with the Suttons and the Maidstones and whoever else is, gosh, Oldham, I think have done it. There's a lot of anti-feeling, and the Football League were under massive pressure from the FA to do something about it. And in a very clever piece of shoe shuffling, whether you think it's the right answer or not, what the Football League chief executive suggested was that we would support it as soon as the PFA and the LMA, the players and the managers, supported it. Very firmly pushing into that court, knowing damn well that they're not going to support it for years. So that's where it is. It's a clever move politically, but it's the right one, it's a different matter. But that's why nothing's going to happen for a while, because ask Neil what he thinks of artificial pitches, and he's far from alone among managers.
Thanks, Eric. So,
Was anything said about goal line technology at our level?
at some point, I'll check my notes in detail to see if anything came up, but no, I don't think there was actually. I think they were reasonably pleased at what was happening at the Premier League level, but it was one of those things I think was just in the too expensive category. It's a bit like full-time referees at our level. If it improves things, that'd be great, but the cost was actually very significant. It put quite a dent in the budget, which is one of the reasons why we're not supportive of that one particularly. Right, Rob, last question at this point.
You mentioned the Checker Trophy. Previously, we've kind of made clear our stance ahead of any home game against the B team or under 21 team, whatever they want to call it, that we're against the whole idea. I know against League 3 have now had a poll over the summer where they voted to expand that to a boycott of all Checker Trophy games. And I was just wondering whether we'll adopt the same approach to the game against, is it Luton we play in the... We play Spurs, but I think Luton. So in theory, if we follow against League 3, we should be encouraging people to boycott both those games.
To be honest, we haven't got that far in detail at the Trust. That's probably something we need to discuss at the next board meeting, just to make sure we know where we are on exactly how far we go in putting the messages out there and how. So say at the moment, if we say anything as overtly as we did last year, we will be breaking a new EFL directive. And I say we're happy to sort of push against that to a degree, but there are limits to how far you might take the fight from that point of view. However, what we can do is get unofficial bodies and the like to make a strong case they can on our behalf. So as for instance, I know the Tottenham Supporters Trust are looking at what sort of stance they should be taking towards the game coming here.